Around 4 years ago when I was 13, me and my family went on a vacation to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. We had gone there several times in the past since it was usually low priced and a nice way to get away from our cold Canadian winters. We were staying at an all-inclusive resort near the ocean. This resort had a lot of things to do during the night, like shows and whatnot. 3 days into our trip, my family went to go see a show. We were all having a fun time, until I started to get a really bad headache, and my parents noticed this, telling me that I should lie down in our room. I agreed and they handed me a key card. As I was walking into the elevator, a tall Hispanic man walked in with me. He was wearing what seemed to be a dirty jacket and ripped jeans, and also had a big dark beard that was uncombed and looked very frizzy. I pushed the button for the 7th floor, and he just stood still, leading me to think his room was there too. He then started asking me questions like how old I was and how long was I staying there. I answered normally, but then he asked where the rest of my family was. My answer was one of the worst things I've ever done in my life. I responded with, "Watching the show downstairs," and as I got off, he started following me down the hallway, which I started sweating and freaking out over. As I was approaching my room, I kind of squeaked and asked, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Back to my room." Now shaking as I put the key card in the door lock, he seemed to be turning around, facing the other room across from me. As soon as the door opened, he turned and charged at me. Because I was looking back, I saw him, ran into the room, and tried shutting the door, but he got to it first. Now it was me and him alone in the hotel room. He had what looked to be a knife or shank, and he was slowly walking towards me and said, "Be quiet, or I'll kill you." As I was in the back of the room, he was getting closer, and I threw the lamp at him and rushed to get around and out the room. He cut my arm pretty deep, but I was sprinting out the room to get to the stairwell. As I got to the lobby, I ran to my family, crying and screaming for help. After that, I got stitches on my arm, and my mum still doesn't forgive herself for not coming with me to the room. The hotel offered us an upgrade to the nice suite, and we took it, but were very paranoid for the rest of the trip. We later found out he was a homeless man that just came through the doors of the hotel. He stole my laptop and my backpack, which were in the open, and then fled to the lobby and out the doors. At the time of this story, I was 14 years old and living in Germany with my mother, father, brother, and a dog. My family and I are British, but we've been living in Germany for a few years at this point due to my father's work. It was great. We had an awesome house, lots of friends, and the going was good. To make it even more amazing, my parents were wrapping up the sale of our old house in the UK, which had been on the market for what felt like forever, and selling it from overseas had just become a massive headache for my parents. The closing of this house sale would not only allow my parents to finally relax, but it was going to pay for the holiday of a lifetime. I'm talking white sand, crystal clear blue oceans, elephant rides, staying in a cabin on the beach, the whole 9 yards. Finally, the offer had been made, the paperwork printed and signed, and to say we were excited was an understatement. This must have been around summertime, as I remember we were due to start back at school in a few weeks. So rather than waiting another 12 months before the next summer break, we planned the holiday for the Christmas period instead. No cold, snow, or freezing wind for us. A short time passed and I came home one day, and my brother and I knew something bad had happened. My dad had come home early from work. There were many phone calls being made, and my mother looked absolutely furious. "What happened?" I asked Mum, hoping to God I wasn't in trouble. "He pulled out," my mother stormed as she slammed the pots down to get dinner ready. "The bloody actually pulled out of buying the house. Can you believe it?" "What? No!" my brother and I both exclaimed. "Yes, so after signing everything, he then has the cheek to ask us to drop the asking price about 5k. I don't bloody think so. He can forget it." My mother calmed down after a bit and sadly told us that it would mean no exotic holiday. We had to stay home instead. We reassured her it was fine despite feeling incredibly disappointed. My brother was 8 at the time and we were really close, so we'd already planned all these amazing activities that we were going to do while we were out there. So sadly the sale was called off and we stayed home for Christmas. The year, however, was 2004. And our destination? The coastline of Sri Lanka. I woke up that Boxing Day only to be greeted by the horror of the most destructive and deadly tsunami in living memory. The coastline, the homes and businesses, and almost 250,000 people just suddenly wiped away in the blink of an eye. I was glued to the TV for most of that day, too horrified to look away, just watching the death toll rise and rise. Newscasters kept showing the before and after photos, and I recognized the wooden cabins we wanted to stay at. We never would have stood a chance. I'm 29 now, and to this day still carry an enormous sense of guilt, and I try to avoid talking about it whenever weird events come up in conversation. So to the bloke who messed up our house deal and ruined our family holiday, thank you for saving our lives. For context, my grandparents got this big suburban house in the 80s for a really low price and decided to build a pool on the second floor to it and whatnot. When I say the house was big, I mean it was big. A large basement with wine cellar, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an office, 2 living rooms, huge kitchen/dining room and a pool house/bar on the first floor. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a balcony terrace, and a living/dining room on the second floor. My family moved in when the construction was still going on, and weird-ass things started to happen. Like a drill going max power being unplugged, or things disappearing and appearing again in strange and odd places. But my family would always joke about the house being haunted, and never really did anything about it. At some point, it got pretty insane, and my grandpa took a bottle of holy water, and that was it. Ever since I remember, I've had this strange, uneasy feeling about the house, and particularly about some rooms within it, like I was never alone and was being watched, but I always brushed it off, thinking that I was just being a silly girl. At some point, I got to completely avoid going into these places. I was maybe 3 or 4 when I had this dream. I was playing at the bottom of the stairs and some shadowy figure started growing from the floor. I remember I was just watching it slowly materialize itself in front of me, until it looked like a man with a hat and evil eyes, all black. A few years ago, researching over the web, I realized it was a shadow man. He had his hands stretched over towards me and was about to say something when I woke up, shaken and scared to death. I sometimes saw this figure standing on the hallway, so I avoided going there by myself as much as I could. When I was 7, I moved to the room besides the stairs on the second floor. This is one of the rooms that made me feel uneasy. I would always find my stuff misplaced around my room, and my lamps and radio unplugged, but I didn't really pay attention to it. Staying in this room, my nightmares and creepy dreams intensified. I remember clearly waking up starving pretty early on a Sunday morning, and when I tried to get up, I fell into a void and woke up really scared. When I finally stopped shaking, I tried to get up again just to end up going into the void once more. This went on 5 times, and I was so scared that I eventually stopped trying to get up until my mum went to wake me up a few hours later. Another time, I was sitting in the kitchen with my grandma late one night. Everyone else was asleep, and we were chatting about life when she sewed some pillows for the sofa. When she was done, she piled the pillows over a counter where there were 4 of them, and made some tea for us to keep talking. We were laughing and everything, when all of a sudden the pillows flew across the kitchen, as if they were angrily tossed and crushed at the laundry room door, which was above the basement, another room that freaked me out. When I was 11 years old, and it was about 11 p.m. on a school night, I turned off all the lights and went to bed. Just a few minutes passed, so there wasn't a real chance that I was dreaming when I heard a rhythmic tapping on my window. It was soft at first and then a bit louder. Keep in mind, this was upstairs. I slowly turned around to the window, and through the curtains I saw this rather tall and lean humanoid figure with a long, thin head and a 3-fingered hand tapping on my window. I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran to my mum's bedroom. I remember she checked my room and everything was normal, so my grandpa and uncle checked the whole yard and found nothing. I obviously didn't sleep that night and stayed in my mum's room for at least a week. After that episode, I switched bedrooms. My new room had a walk-in closet where my grandma kept the towels, sheets and some really old stuff that we never used, so its door was mainly closed. The door had a latch on the outside that was impossible to open from the inside of the closet. One afternoon when I was about 14, I was heading home alone, playing video games after school when I heard this loud bang coming from the closet. I immediately froze and looked at the door. Then it started to sound as if someone was desperately trying to take down the door, so I noped my way downstairs and waited for my mum. One afternoon when I was 15, I came back from school starving, as only a teen would, so I went directly to the kitchen. As far as I knew, I was alone. When I was almost done fixing myself a sandwich, I hear a loud bang upstairs and almost immediately heard my mum scream in absolute terror. So I obviously ran upstairs to check on her. We caught each other on the stairs. She was pale as ever and shaking, so I took her down to calm her down. As soon as she could speak to me again, she said she was watching TV in her room when she heard the same noise I heard. She startled and looked at the window and saw the shadow man floating outside her window, hence her scream and the running downstairs. We ended up leaving that house about 17 years ago. I still remember a couple nightmares I had back then regarding the house, and even now sometimes in my dreams, I still feel that house and those feelings return. It creeps me out. I'm in my early 20s. I'm waitress/bartender at a hotel restaurant. Construction workers in our town often stayed at the hotel and would come eat and drink at the restaurant. I met a really tall, cute guy, not a creep, but ultimately a prick, and whenever he was in town we would hang out and stuff. He lived 2 states over but was in my area a lot, so one time he was working a job and staying in a town the state over and I drove to meet him. When I got to his hotel, we went to the hotel bar and had a few drinks with some other construction guys that happened to be there, not his company, then went back to the room. Later we decided to order food from the bar. The prick was in the shower when the bar called, so I went and picked up our food. When I got down there, the guys that we were drinking with earlier were still there and were pretty sauced by this point. The bartender was busy for a while, so I sat and played with the digital slots. One of the construction guys came over and immediately started hitting on me and trying to touch me and put his arm around me and stuff, despite knowing full well I was there with someone else. He kept telling me his room number over and over and had to directly, loudly, tell him to get the hell away from me multiple times, and he finally did only once the others started noticing. In my flustered rage, I grabbed my food from the bartender and went back to the room and told him all about it. He rolled his eyes and kind of shrugged it off, and I was really put off by it all and really felt vulnerable. That's when I realized my phone was gone. I left it on the bar at the slot machine. So the prick and I went looking for it. The guys were all gone, but the bartender told me the creep took my phone and assured him he was going to return it to me. Great. Then I remembered that he had told me his room number. I told the prick this, and he of course passively accused me of asking for it. I didn't care, and marched him to the creep's room. I knocked, and the prick, who's 6'7", stayed to the side out of view of the peephole to see what would happen. The creep, way too enthusiastically, swung the door open and grabbed my wrist, and proceeded to try and pull me into the room. Thank God for the prick, who then stepped behind me and yelled, "Hey!" to the creep, who was half his size, and I'll never forget the look on his face, like he just shat a brick. I yanked my arm and yelled, "Give me my phone." The creep then lied and said he didn't have it and the bartender was lying. The prick didn't do anything else at this point, so we just left. I felt defeated and unsafe and annoyed and just wanted to go, but I couldn't because I didn't have my phone. I managed to sleep a little that night, but woke up at 4:30 when the prick left to go to work. I stayed in the hotel till about 7 and was fuming, and then decided to do something about it. I gathered my stuff and went and found a maintenance man who was working in the pool area. I contemplated telling him the whole story, but decided to just damsel in distress to avoid any more drama. I told him I was leaving and realized I'd locked my phone in my room and gave him the creep's room number. I knew the creep would be already at his job site, so we went to the room and I had the maintenance man call my cell phone from his. Sure enough, you could hear a faint vibration through the door. He took this as proof of it being my room and opened the door and let me in. I thanked him and left. There it was, just sitting on the bathroom counter. My phone. I grabbed it and turned to leave, but decided my petty ass wasn't done yet. I took the creep's toothbrush and ran it along under the toilet rim and put it back in the same spot. Then I happily left, phone in hand, and stopped seeing the prick for good. I still smile knowing that the creep had to notice that my phone was gone, but probably had no idea how I got it back, or that he was brushing his teeth with toilet water. This was a few years ago, on a night scuba dive. There were 8 of us in the group, including our dive master and his assistant. We had just finished our dive, and were gathered up in a circle ready to ascend and get out of the water, when my dive master freezes. He takes his flashlight, and pointing it outside our circle of divers, he catches something circling us with the beam. Turns out, it was a 12-foot-long great white shark. At this point, half the group are trying to keep the shark illuminated as it circles us, and remarkably everyone stayed calm. The only thing that went through my mind were iterations of those two thoughts. Don't look like a yummy, delicious fatty seal, and that I hope I taste terrible. My dive master gets our attention and slowly puts his thumb up, and then makes an upwards motion with all of us beginning to ascend, and the shark kept with us until we were maybe 10 feet from the surface. Then it turned off into the darkness and was gone. I did not go back into the ocean for about a week after that. My parents bought their first house back in 1972. It was a fixer-upper, but they decided to move in right away and fix things when time and money permitted. Within a few days of moving there, the new neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They also let my parents know that the previous owners had moved out after a nasty divorce. They had lost their second child to SIDS, and their relationship went downhill from there. My parents were horrified, more so because they were newly pregnant and couldn't imagine going through such a thing. They eventually pretty much forgot all about it. Life went on, and they were in love with their new life and their new house. In preparation for the baby, they decided to wallpaper the nursery. Now my dad told my mum there was no need in wallpapering the inside of the closet, but she insisted. She was kneeling down, scraping off old paint inside the closet when her eyes fell upon something that made her blood turn to ice. Written in crayon, about the eye level for a kindergartner, in childish scrawl was written, "I killed the baby." This is a story which I took a while to find out about from my parents. My family consists of my mum, dad, big sister and I. We were on holiday at a big family-style resort in the 90s. For context, this happened somewhere in a South American country. I've told this story many times, but don't want to dox myself by giving away too many details. For context, I have no recollections of the event, but I do remember parts of the holiday. The sea, the white sand, and banana trees. The 4 of us were staying at one of those classic family hotels, the ones where the buffet have eggs, bacon, fresh fruits and pancakes galore. The type where there are also lots of kids and a lot of animation for them. There was a kids club where I would go, and I remember making a friend there too, a little boy my age. That's all I remember, and the rest is from my dad recounting this. We were at the hotel playing area, my parents and I. A woman working for the hotel and part of the kids club animation team were playing with me. I was a cute, shy little blonde kid, and she started playing with me and talking to me. My parents relax, enjoying their holiday knowing that their daughter is being entertained by the kids club staff. All good, until my dad turns around and sees that I'm missing. I'm not next to them, and the woman playing with me was also nowhere in sight. With Papa Bear reflexes, my dad stands up to see the woman is walking slowly but surely across the hotel with his daughter in her arms. He begins chasing her down the hotel, and she takes up some speed, beginning to run with me in her arms. This was a vast hotel complex, so there was a long way to go. My dad says he ran after her through doors which would then close in his face. By a stroke of luck, he managed to catch up with her just before she made it to the side exit and pulled me out of her hands. In shock, he grabbed me and ran back, letting the woman disappear into a forest. Immediately, my parents went to the hotel to complain and let them know that either their staff or somebody pretending to be their staff tried to take me. The hotel brushed this off casually and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. This happens sometimes." I hope this hotel has changed since the 90s, but it really makes me think how messed up is it that the hotel didn't give a single damn that someone was almost taken on their watch, and it's almost like they were in on it somehow. When I was 13, I lived in a small town in rural Zimbabwe. We had a large single-story house with a massive garden that surrounded the property. On one side of the house, the garden narrowed between our house and the fence of the neighbor's house. At the end of this narrow section was an empty, decrepit, cement-lined pond that I had recently cleared of rubble and plant life with the plan of eventually filling it again. One afternoon, my friend Dan and I were messing around in the garden, and for some reason I found myself running down the narrowed section of garden straight towards the pond. Suddenly, for some reason that I can't really articulate, dread and fear washed over my body like 1,000 needles raining down from the sky. I stopped dead in my tracks about 2 meters from the pond and found myself breathlessly staring at it motionlessly. From the crack on one side of the pond, a long snake, perhaps a meter long, emerged 3 or 4 seconds later. It was a Mozambique spitting cobra, a large, aggressive, and extremely venomous snake that wouldn't hesitate to bite or spit at threats. Like a 13-year-old boy running past its new home in the wall of the pond, for instance. I slowly backed away, and the pond was filled with sand the next day. To this day, I don't know what it was that stopped me dead in my tracks, but if I continued, perhaps I wouldn't be here today. It has long been rumored that the house next to me has been haunted. People would come and go like it was a perpetual revolving door. The longest anyone stayed was about 6 months. It was a normal house, upper middle class, tan with a white picket fence, a good-sized deck and a decent yard. The only thing slightly creepy about this house was that a man who had owned the house for years and moved had buried all of his dead pets in the backyard. So it was an animal graveyard of sorts. It sat empty for quite some time, and this is where my experience begins. I was in high school when it happened, probably my freshman year. I had gotten together with 2 friends, Carol and Erin, and we were trying to figure out what to do to keep from being bored. Someone, maybe it was me, decided to go check the house out and see what all the fuss was about. We walked through the open gate and into the backyard. A cable man had recently come by to do some work, which was very odd since no one lived there. After standing in the yard for a minute, we decided to play hide and seek. We opted to draw the boundary line at the front yard and backyard. Going inside was off limits. I would count and they would hide. Well, I found Carol almost immediately. and she decided to help me find Aaron. We looked for a few minutes or so when we heard a noise that sounded like movement in the house, kind of like someone scurrying across the floor. We assumed that our friend had broken the rules and gone inside. "Erin," we shouted at the house, "you know inside's off limits." We expected to hear the door open and Erin come walking out, talking about how she just wanted to look, when we hear her come out the bushes behind us, explaining that it wasn't her in the house. We get a look of horror on our faces, and slowly turn to look at the large window that overlooks the yard. The house is pitch black, so it's impossible to see inside. We aren't looking for very long when I see something directly in front of the window. It was a young girl, maybe 11 or 12. The only thing that was out of place was that she wasn't from this time period. She was wearing a dark dress with a high collar and 2 braids down her back. She looked sad and mouthed something that I understand to be "help me." I can't figure out what she means when I see something behind her that made my blood run cold. It's a man about 6 foot 5 feet tall and sinister. He had a look of pure hatred on his face, and his hands reach out as if to take the girl standing in front of him. As fast as he appears, they vanish. I come back to reality and turn to look at my friends. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. I turn to my friend Erin and ask what she saw. She describes the little girl exactly, and saw the man as well. We hightailed it out of there as fast as we could, and have never been back. I was on a date in Camden with a girl who from photos I wasn't overly excited about meeting, but in the flesh made my eyebrows shoot off my head. She was really pretty and smart and funny. We had quite a few cocktails, and I think we were in the Blues Kitchen before going to the gay bar in Camden, which I think has since closed down. I think it was called the Black Cap. The date was going well and we met these people who join our table, and the guy tells me at the bar that my date said she wanted me to kiss her. I did, and it turned out the guy was just helping us by moving things along. My date was really shocked and told me I was bold, but she liked it. She came back to my hotel room with me, which was a 10-minute walk away. The room was kind of small but cool and space age in style. We were both drunk and made out a lot. Then she started crying about problems she was having with a friend who was really sick and her job was really stressful. Full on sobbing. She left in embarrassment, even though I was worried about her leaving like that. She said she would be okay. As she left, I saw a large man in a black, thick leather jacket in the corridor. He was staring at my date as she left, and then stared at me as I closed the door. I was pretty wasted, so after checking my date got on the bus, I had a nap and was awoken by a banging at the door. I ignored it, but then it kept going on, so I got up and staggered to the door and opened it a crack. I recognized the leather elbow and arm as the door was shoved violently open. I was drunk, and the jolt of the door caused me to fall over. Luckily, the room entrance was small and around the width of the door, so my back was against the wall by the door while my feet touched the other wall. My body kept the door closed as this man kept shoving against it. I managed to get the door closed again, locked it and went to sleep as I was still drunk. When I woke up in the morning, I thought I had dreamt the whole thing about the man and the door. But when I looked down at my side, my ribs, hips and thigh had dark bruises. I was really lucky, and I'm so glad the room was tight on space, because if it hadn't been, the guy would have got in pretty easily. So creepy leather-clad man who tried to break into my hotel room, let's not meet. I just want to add I'm female, of average height, average body weight, and have really beady arms. I work as an engineer in a data center cooling plant. We're responsible for basically everything in the building, mechanical, electrical, HVAC, plumbing. So the engineer I'm relieving tells me there's an odd sound coming from the Con Ed vaults. This is where huge transformers are that step down the 26,000 volts or so to a voltage the building can actually use. We're not allowed in those vaults. They're locked and only Con Ed has the keys. So he leaves and I take a walk by the vaults. I had never actually heard electricity arcing through the air before, but I knew I was hearing it then. I called Con Ed's emergency line and told them to get out there ASAP. A crew of 2 guys showed up. They seemed calm and disinterested in the elevator all the way up. "It's probably just a contact chattering," they said. We got off the elevator and they start heading down the hall. The sound was way louder now. We weren't even near the vaults and there was no mistaking it. Both guys stopped dead in their tracks and kind of hunkered down. I saw the color drain from them. I wasted no time getting back in the elevator. If you've never seen a video of a large transformer explosion, go to YouTube. These transformers are not like the ones you see up on utility poles. They're as big as a couple of trucks stacked on top of each other. Anyone on the floor, when one of them cooked off, would be gone. And we have 8 of them. Eventually, the con guys got in, but not before cutting the power to the entire building. They called in right away, cut the power, then a bunch of more Con Ed guys showed up to check out the damage. Apparently there's a conductor at the top of these transformer called a hammerhead. The insulation had burnt right off, and it just got worse from there. Everyone in the utility was glad we caught it when we did. Last night I was in my kitchen alone, and just making myself something to eat around 3 AM or so, and I can feel something near or around me. While making myself a drink, I can see some sort of dark shadow quickly disappear around the wall, which has a little mirror cabinet in the corner, so I can see right around the wall, and of course there's nothing there. At this point I can feel something tug at my shirt collar, and the hair on my neck stands up on edge. So I quickly finish making what I had meant to and get back to my room ASAP. I know for a fact that I'm the only person awake, as my sisters are asleep and my brother is out. My mum's at work, and my dad is asleep in his room, so any noises I heard outside were definitely not them. I've read a lot of stories, and at the time thought it might be my mind playing tricks on me. But at this point I know that something is causing me to feel uneasy about the kitchen, or at least that part of the house alone. So after a few minutes I went to put my plate away and basically received confirmation that there is something here. I have a weird paranoia about stuff, so I always check to see if my balcony door is closed and locked, and there is no excess stuff plugged into outlets, that the fan light in the living room is off. The only time I leave it on is when I'm not going to sleep or during the day, and that the sink isn't on in any way, and that the stove dials are all off. I turn them slowly to make sure they are in the off position, then last I checked to see if all the bolts and locks on the main door are locked. Just before I went into my room with the plate, I did all 5 and went to eat. After I came out, I felt that same feeling again, and quickly washed my plate and glass, but then I saw what confirmed it all. In the living room we have this little cabinet with boxes in it. The time it was filled, and the time it was put there was the only time it's been moved. This has not been moved at all since we put it in that spot. But as I walked back to my room I turned around and saw that it was sitting about a foot forward from the wall. Now, had anyone moved it forward to grab something that might have fallen behind it, they would have had to have put it back right away because my mum would get angry. To be honest, now that I think about it, you can't really drop anything behind the cabinet to begin with, as the entire cabinet is squared off and everything would be contained inside. But as I'm moving back, I looked around to see if anyone was awake, but nope. I turned around to go through my 5 steps again, and the first thing I notice is that the balcony door is open slightly, with the latch. It's a little lever that when it's in the upward position, it will be unlocked, and then it swings downwards towards the side and points down, which is when it locks itself. It is in the halfway point directly 90 degrees pointing to the side. I've never seen anyone in the house doing this, as it would get in the way of opening the door itself due to the latch being in the way of the handle. This confirmed that something is there, but not an intruder. We are about 20 stories up, because I checked everything in the house and nothing, not even in the smallest places to hide. But something even more creepy happened the next morning. I had decided to go check the mail downstairs and got ready. As I stepped outside, the light right above my head started to flicker. I know, cheesy as hell, but I still got that uneasy feeling, so I knew it might not just be the bulb, which, by the way, wouldn't a bulb just go dimmer and then stop working rather than flicker? And my little attentiveness above me. I always look around and walk down the hall when I noticed that the stairwell door was fully shut. The apartment in front of mine and all the others along the hallway were also fully shut. I thought, now this is the perfect time to get a video of all of this. So I turned around and then started to record. There's no wind in the hallway, no doors that need to be closed, as it's on the other floors, and you can't hear what's going on the other floors either. These doors are pretty heavy, so no gust of wind or anything will slam them. It's 30 degrees C, humid, no wind at all unless you were outside. So after I got the mail, I started walking back down the hallway from the elevator, only to be met with the lights working perfectly. I had been gone for 3 minutes, or less, as I had a 3-minute song playing, and it barely finished by the time I came back up. No repairman is that good that he can figure out the light is out, get his ass up there with a ladder, take out the glass around the bulb, replace it, take the old bulb and ladder away, in the elevator which I was just in, within 3 minutes. When I was about 8 or 9, my family took a trip skiing to a small resort a few hours from where we lived in Spain. The resort itself was a sleepy town of about 400 to 500 people, with a few small supermarkets and hotels and not much else. Typically we picked the worst time possible to embark on the trip, which had been planned for a good few years. The night after we arrived there was a blizzard, and we spent the first half of the week locked in the hotel. Although we were able to go outside for the remaining few days, we had little to do given that the slopes were shut. The story I want to tell comes from those first few days locked in the hotel. Despite my parents' annoyance at the time of the trip being a nightmare, myself and my sister, who was 11 months older, had a fantastic time. Locked up in the mountains with nothing to do, we were able to spend our days running around the hotel, eating sweets and watching TV in the lobby. I should probably mention at this point that the hotel is somewhat of a maze. The large bar/restaurant area where my parents sat each day, reading, was at the center of the hotel. A myriad of smaller rooms then connected to the bar area at random points, shooting off in different directions. These rooms often had no discernible functions. Each one had the same mahogany interior, and they were full of couches, fireplaces, and antiques that allowed for a great game of hide and seek. The room would often have offshoots themselves, connecting to new rooms which would be then connected to yet more useful wooden caves. As such, it was possible to be 4 or 5 rooms away from the main hotel area at any time, without knowing exactly where you were or how to get back. Anyway, at some point along the weekend, myself and my sister decided to play hide and seek. Bearing in mind the above, it was almost an impossible challenge to find the hider, especially if they moved. To this day, I'm certain my sister was a filthy little cheat. At one point in the game, I was about to give up on searching for her until I heard her voice from what sounded like a few rooms away. After successfully navigating the web of rooms, I emerged to find her sitting on a couch alongside a German man with grey hair, probably in his 60s if I had to guess. As soon as I emerged into the room, the man turned to me and told me he was talking to my sister and taking her to the swimming pool, and asked if I wanted to join them. I remember immediately thinking it's odd that there was a swimming pool that we hadn't heard of. My parents had been complaining that morning about how much TV we were watching, and so I was sure they would have taken us there had they known about it. And besides, the hotel did not seem this size to be able to host one. I told the man that I'd have to ask my parents first, and told my sister to come back with me to find them. He immediately replied that I should go, and that he'll take my sister on ahead. I told my sister she absolutely had to come with me, but excited at the thought of the swimming pool, she said she didn't want to go. We began to argue with the man taking my sister's side and encouraging me to go ask my parents' permission while he waited with my sister. I dug my foot in, telling my sister that our parents would be very cross if we went somewhere on our own, and after a few minutes of bickering she eventually gave in and came back with me, giving her assurance to the man that we'd be back. Of course, when we told our parents, they were livid. My dad went back to the room to try and find the man, but with all the offshoots and given that all the random rooms looked the same, it was almost impossible to be sure we were in the right one. In any case, there was no sign of him. I remember my dad screaming at the clerk at the hotel lobby that he needed a list of names of all male guests and their room numbers, but of course they wouldn't give it to him. We spent the rest of the trip by our parents' side, terrified of the thought of being locked up in a blizzard with him. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. The scary thing, we checked with the lobby, and as we'd imagined, the hotel didn't have a pool. So scary German man who wanted to take me in a blizzard? Let's not meet again. There's a small island called Ilha de Queimada Grande off the coast of Sao Paulo, Brazil, that is home to the highest concentration of golden lancehead vipers, one of the most venomous species of snake in the world. They are unique to this island alone, and its venom causes your flesh to rot off to your bones. The island is so densely packed with these snakes that there are up to 5 snakes per square meter on this island. You could stand anywhere on the island and be no more than a few feet away from a golden lancehead viper. Apparently there was only a lighthouse keeper who lived on the island with his family, but they didn't survive long. After a while, snakes crawled through their windows. Panicking, they ran outside into the forest where they were confronted by thousands of snakes, and were bitten numerous times running through the forest, hanging overhead by branches. They all died before they could reach their boat, and their bodies were found scattered through the forest later by a navy vessel making a routine supply stop. There was also an attempt to build a banana plantation on the island, but that quickly ended in disaster, as all the workers were dying from the vipers. The island is forbidden to civilians by the Brazilian Navy. In the summer of 2015, my husband and I were house sitting for these rich people in between our big move to the mainland, as we're from Hawaii, and some really crazy creepy stuff started happening just a few days in. The first weird thing that happened was when we got there I couldn't find how to get the motion sensor light in the entry garage hallway to turn off. We thought nothing of it. A few days later I was watching TV, and you can see the front door from the living room, and I saw a shadowy man walk by the front door. I wasn't particularly freaked out, because unfortunately shadow people are frequent visitors of mine. I think it must have been a Hawaii thing because everyone has seen them there. I think it must have been that same evening that I hadn't seen my husband for several minutes. So I called out to him, and saw that front motion detector light flip on again right at that moment. So I walked out to it and heard him go, "What?" from the backyard, not the front yard. I quickly walked to the backyard through the house, and staring back towards the front yard I saw an orb zoom out the house and into the yard. A side note on orbs, I've watched those paranormal shows on Discovery Channel but never thought they were real until I actually saw them. Anyway, fast forward a few days, a different motion detecting light started going crazy one night, flipping on and off in varying intervals. At this point my husband, who you might call the rational one, is totally freaked out. I, however, felt extremely curious and wanted to investigate, which is so weird for me because I'm a total scaredy cat. I even make my husband walk me to the bathroom in the middle of the night because I'm too scared to go by myself. But I just felt compelled to go towards the garage upstairs area, and there's an apartment above the garage, and figure out what's going on. We got a flashlight and shined it into the garage and apartment windows, and we couldn't help feeling this very, very weird dread and fear emanating from it. Even though I was curious, I also felt it in the pit of my stomach, like some overwhelming depression or evil. We called it quits, I locked the doors, and we went to bed after that. There were several other things that we encountered while we were staying there. One evening I heard someone say, "Ding dong," kind of like how someone would say when they get to a friend's house to inform them of their presence. after which the dogs, as we were also dog-sitting, went nuts barking at the front door, although there was no one there. One night when we were walking into the bedroom, something brushed up against my arm, and when I turned I saw a person walking the other way down the hallway, turning a corner. Myself and one of the dogs saw an orb fly out of a room we were in. The dog definitely saw it too, and he looked freaked out. One morning while showering, I dropped my razor on the ground, and when I bent down to pick it up, it was on the countertop across the bathroom. One morning my husband dropped his toothbrush and he couldn't find it for an hour, and then it reappeared on the countertop. I've had a lot of ghostly paranormal encounters in my life, but this last summer just puts it over the top. At one point I was in tears asking my husband why I'm so perceptive and why these things keep happening to me. This was around 2007-2008. I was about 12 at the time, and me and my dad were heading up to Cape York. It was a good few days' drive to Cairns from where we lived in Bundaberg, Queensland, and we were in no rush. We finally got into Cairns at around 10:30 p.m. We were both really excited to cross the Daintree River and really start the adventure. It was decided that we would hang out at my uncle's place for a few days, as we didn't see him often. My uncle is a dead-set straight out of the 70s, Lennon glasses wearing pot-smoking hippie musician guys. He also loved fishing, and his favourite place to go was the Daintree. Anyway, the morning rolls around and we head out to launch the boat at around 6 a.m. and fish away for most of the day. Didn't catch anything, but we were kept entertained by my uncle telling us all his stories. As the sun is beginning to set, we head over this little spit of white sand way over the side of the river. My uncle was dead set that he could find his way back in the dark, so we hung about on the little private beach talking, drinking and cooking a lamb roast in the campfire oven. Now for those of you who don't know, the Daintree has a bit of a lizard problem. And when I say lizards, I mean huge ass crocodiles that will mess you up 8 ways to Sunday. My uncle is adamant that they don't come this far out, as the water starts getting a bit cold for them, so we aren't too worried. So as we're sitting there, we notice that my uncle isn't doing much talking, he's just kind of sitting and listening. We ask him what's up, and he sort of motions us to shut up. We don't really hear much at all, but he's got the both of us pretty spooked. All of a sudden he jumps up and runs as fast as you'd please to the tinny and grabs this big long bamboo spear thing. One of us had to ask him earlier in the day what it was for, and he said he keeps it around in case crocs got too close, he could give them a jab from the boat and they'd swim away and leave him be. Well, he takes a few steps off into the dark, jabs into this patch of mangroves with this long ass bamboo pokey stick, and me and my dad just about died when we hear this big scaly thing take off into the water at 50 miles an hour. We noped out of there without finishing our roast. Chills my blood to know that thing was a few feet away from us while we were having a good time. If any of us would have walked off in that direction for a slash, we'd have been chomped for sure. I'm a 22-year-old female, and when I was 14, my family and I went to a resort in Antalya, Turkey. The resort was relatively small, and every day there were plenty of activities that involved all the guests, like pool games and competitions. The restaurant was also cafeteria style, so everyone ate together. As a result, basically everyone at the resort knew each other well and by name, and became pretty close-knit after a few days. In particular, there was a middle-aged, bald British guy called Danny, and his 2 little kids were about 2 to 4. Everyone at the resort seemed to really love this family, as he was a single father who was on vacation and his 2 little kids were cute. So they became popular pretty quickly. At one point I was walking back up to my room when I heard another guest at the hotel say my name in the context of volunteering me to help Danny with something. I went to see what was going on, and the other guest told me that Danny needed help taking his kids upstairs because they were being badly sunburnt and he couldn't carry them both at once. However, the other guest was busy with something, so he suggested that I should help Danny instead. I didn't really think anything of it, so I picked up the little girl and walked with Danny and his son towards the elevator. We eventually got to his hotel room, and I tried to drop off the girl by the door, but he politely asked me to drop her off on the couch. Unfortunately, I was naive and too trusting, so I thought it wouldn't be a problem for me to just step in and drop her off, quickly, before I go. Worst case scenario, I would scream and people in the neighboring rooms or hallways would hear me. So I stepped inside, and as I dropped Danny's daughters off on the couch, he closed the door and turned the lights off behind me. It was pitch black, because my eyes hadn't adjusted yet, when I heard him leaning close to my ear and say, "Kids, say hello to your new mummy." I instantly got goosebumps all over and my heart dropped. Whenever I tell this story to anyone, they always say that he was probably kidding, but I can assure you 100% that he was not. I panicked and started feeling up the wall for the light switch or the door, and he could tell that I was trying to leave, so he said, "Aren't you gonna stay and watch some telly with us?" But I'd finally found the doorknob and just made a run for it. I ran downstairs crying and so afraid. When I tried to tell my family, no one believed that he was being serious or creepy because they'd all met him and thought he was so sweet, a lovely, single father. I didn't see him the next day or in the following days, so I think he checked out after that. Quite a number of years ago, on my first trip to Africa, I was staying in a group campground in the Serengeti. The camp had quite a number of tents and was approved by the park management and was allotted one ranger with an AK-47 that looked like it was from the 70s. He patrolled around at night, but the camp had no barrier and he couldn't be everywhere. I was on my way back to my tent after playing cards into the night with those old crappy headlamps, which I had pointed to the ground. The camp was mostly empty, and my tent was at the farther end of where people were staying. I was watching my step as I looked, and the wash from my headlamp gives off enough light for me to see two pairs of eyes, one amber and one blue, stare back at me from about 20 feet away in the dark. I can't see what it is, they're just staring at me. Not small eyes either, probably about 2 or so feet off the ground. There's a point where you're so absolutely terrified your entire being goes into overdrive. Fight or flight doesn't ever happen. You can't feel anything, your body continues to work on its own accord, but all your mental capacity is focused on what's right in front of you. No adrenaline, almost like an out-of-body experience. I'm completely unaware of it, but I continue to walk, and since I don't show any change of behavior, the eyes turn off me and walk away. I go into my tent as calm as can be, just in complete shock, climb into bed, and wake up the next morning, bring the ranger over and find the tracks. Those eyes belong to 2 spotted hyena pack hunters, on par with lions. I've had other encounters in Africa over the years, but that's been the only time I've ever been alone in the presence of a superior number of predators without any kind of weapon to defend myself, especially at night. As of today, I'm a 28-year-old female, but growing up I was a very sensitive little boy. My parents adopted me as a baby, and I never met my birth family until 2012. It was then I learned that every woman in my birth family were all quite sensitive to the paranormal. Nobody in my adoptive family had any sort of sensitivity, but they all did things subconsciously. When I was 9, my family moved to a very nice house in St. Helena, Napa, overlooking the valley. It was a beautiful 2-story house, but in a weird way since it was on a hill. From the road, the 2nd story was the first, but from the backyard down the mountain, both floors were visible. I believed it was called a sloped lot. Upstairs were the garage, linked to the main house by a breezeway leading to the laundry room. To the right was the study, and straight ahead was a living room and a kitchen. The hallway ran parallel to the kitchen, meeting at a family/dining room, where the front door sat, though none of us actually used it. Right next to that were the stairs, oh the dreaded stairs, leading down to one long hallway connecting the bedrooms. The experiences began happening immediately after we moved in. Part of me believes it was drawn to the negative trauma I suffered at the hands of my abusive father, who focused his rage mostly on me. And that's why I was targeted out of my brothers. But that's just a theory. The first of my many experiences was when the whole family was at my middle school for a scholastic book fair. I remember having a sudden twisting in my gut when my parents got a call that our backyard was on fire. To this day, nobody knows how it happened. It just started. Then the real fun began. It started out slowly, and only ever happened downstairs. My brothers and I would wake up and see a man walking back and forth on the patio, glancing through the French doors of our bedrooms as he passed. We never felt malice from him, and we all recalled seeing him. What makes that particular bit interesting is that from a child's perspective, usually the male entity would be malicious, while the female entity could be a protector. In my house, it was the polar opposite. Myself and my brothers felt a dark presence lurking downstairs in the hallway that would affect all three of us, to the point where we would take the stairs 2 or 3 at a time as fast as possible. I would have a recurring nightmare about struggling to get to the top of the stairs when something caught behind me. In one particular dream, I was reaching for the top stair, and the entity caught me and strapped my mouth shut so I couldn't scream. Keep in mind, I was too young for these things to naturally come to me. In the beginning, the door to my bedroom would slam in the wee hours of the morning, so loudly it would wake my father. He insisted it was a draft, even though no one else's doors would do it, and again it slammed with a massive force. We had to put a 10-pound bookend in front of it. Not much later, the entity in the hall would probe our bedrooms to see who was the most sensitive. My older brother, who slept at the end of the hall, nearest the darkness, outgrew his empathetic sensitivity. And my younger brother eventually stopped as well. But I remained more sensitive than ever, and I knew it. And that's when I met her. When the entity first introduced itself, I felt like it was kind of a protector, like the man from the balcony. But I knew that it wasn't true. She would stand at the far end of the hallway and wait. Not that she was actually there. There was no one there. But it was more of a feeling of perpetual dread. It wasn't darkness or blackness, but more that it physically sucked the light in around it like a dark hole. She would come to me in dreams as various entities, but the man would always show up and protect me. Mind you, I neither knew her nor the man, and the fact that the house was built on an inactive volcano littered with limestone and obsidian probably boosted the energy or what have you. For about 7 years I would wake up promptly at 3 a.m. sweating bullets, hearing someone running back and forth in the hallway, panting as they passed my room, repeatedly until around 5 a.m. when it began to get light. The first face-to-face incident with this creature was when I woke up at scheduled at 3 a.m. like clockwork, and heard the panting and pacing in the hallway. After about 20 minutes, I got too scared to sit there and do nothing, and reached to the dresser by my bed and turned on the light. The panting and pacing stopped, and I waited about 10 seconds of soul-crippling silence before it happened. Long, gnarly, shadowy fingers slowly gripped the doorframe one by one. I heard the wood of the frame creak slightly as the wispy fingers pulled into the bedroom. Before my brain could process what I was seeing, I heard her gasp, like an audible gasp. The fingers retreated in pain, and I sat in silence until the sun came up 2 hours later. That was the first time I realized I had a weapon against this thing. I still don't fully understand it, but she couldn't exist in light. While that alone brought tears to my eyes recalling it, there was one other experience that haunts me to this day. Plenty of years had gone by now, and I had turned 14. My father was a prominent doctor in the area, and he was planning on taking my mother to a fancy hospital gala the same night my little brother had a sleepover at a friend's house, and my older brother was out college shopping in some other county. It was the first time I had the house to myself at night. I begged them to reschedule or hired me a babysitter. They told me I was old enough to be a babysitter and that I needed to grow up. Everyone in my family, them included, experienced weird happenings, but they all preferred to turn a blind eye. So my pleas fell on deaf ears, and I was left alone. I spent the first half of the evening upstairs where it was safe, occasionally glancing towards the staircase for any activity from the living room while the TV distracted me. About 10 or 11 p.m., I remember thinking that I was too old to be scared to be by myself, and I could sleep downstairs alone if I wanted to. I kept the lights on upstairs and slowly descended the staircase, feeling the darkness getting closer with every step. When I reached the last step, I leaped to the light switch and hit it, illuminating the hallway, shaking violently. I hurried to my bedroom. Through the eerie quiet, my footsteps on the carpet were the only sound to break the silence. I finally slunk into my bedroom and quickly turned on the dresser light, jumping into bed as I stared into the lights shining through the downstairs. Going over in my head that all the doors were locked, all the windows were closed, and that as long as these lights were on I was safe, the lassitude of Morpheus overcame me, and my mind began to wander into the fields of Nod. Unlike the usual times I woke up at night, this time was slightly different. I woke up suddenly completely alert, with the fight or flight response already kicking in. I was facing the wall, but was absolutely terrified. I felt like if I moved or even breathed too loudly, it would spell immediate death. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was most likely only a few minutes, before I mustered up the courage to roll over. When I did, my heart sunk. All the lights in the house were off, and a womanly shadow was standing in the doorway, and thought that maybe my mother had popped her head in, before I realized she was with my father at the gala all night, and they were staying in a hotel until morning. I just sat there frozen, locked in gaze with this creature who finally made it through the threshold of my doorframe and into my room, a feat she had yet to accomplish. I closed my eyes and repeated in my head that it isn't real. It isn't real. I was trying to control my breathing as I shake and shiver violently, and I decide to peek and see if she's still there. Surely she can't come in further. I open my eyes. It's standing right over me, at the edge of my bed looking down at me. Not with its eyes. It didn't have eyes. What it did have was a large, toothy grin amidst the wispy shadows of its body. I daredn't scream and even move, but hold the gaze as I heard a deep rumble emanating from the swirling torrent of darkness that was this creature. Having grown up terribly abused, I knew fear, but this was something else. I had never been this afraid before in my life. It was no longer creaks or shadows darting in the corner of your eye. It was face to face with me. Something else, something not of this world. And it wanted me. I knew in this moment, as if its mouth began to expand, that if I did nothing I would die. So I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. My body suddenly lurched upwards from the bed towards the entity, and I screamed at it. Not a scream of fear, but more like a war cry. Like it could try to kill me, but I wasn't planning on making it easy. My face almost went through it, as it lurched up before it recoiled and let out an unearthly wail. As it heard my cry, it left the room. Within moments, all the lights in the house were back on, and I just sat there shivering in shock until the dam broke and I began to cry. I just cradled my pillow and rocked back and forth on the bed, sobbing until the sun came up and my parents returned home. My family, devout Catholic doctors, were already skeptical of these things and didn't believe me, attempting to convince me it was a night terror or perhaps sleep paralysis. Only I could move. I could think. I wasn't stuck. And it actually happened. I know I didn't dream it because I stayed awake until the next day. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But this was just the kind of thing that happened in this house. I believe it was limited to that specific location because it didn't follow me to college or anywhere else beyond. I fear for those who moved in when my parents sold it, but it would be cool to get in touch with who lives there and ask if they've experienced similar things. and we did have trouble selling it. It was on the market for years. Anytime someone would come to view it, they would get creeped out and leave. Anyway, that's my story. I personally don't believe in demons or anything gaudy, but I'll respect you if you do. If you have any theories on what it could have been, feel free to comment. This story takes place nearly 30 years ago now, and is a memory I have spoken a lot about in therapy. The day was like any other. I got up in the morning, tired, and really couldn't be bothered to leave for school, but my mother was at my door nagging at me to get up. I open my eyes and take a good look around my room, spot my uniform on the chair from yesterday, and get ready to have a shower. Within about half hour, I'm ready to leave to school. I put on the bare minimum of makeup that we were allowed to wear and go sit at the table to have breakfast. I see my brother watching TV, and my dad is reading the newspaper. My mum looks like she's getting ready for another day of doing whatever she does at home, cooking, cleaning, and the like. She was also about 8 months pregnant. So we're just there having small talk before I look at my watch and realize I have to make the groggy journey to school. I walk down the 5 or 6 flights of stairs until I get to the bottom floor and slowly make my way out. I make the bus in good time and reach school before the bell. Now, school was a blur, and I don't remember what time it happened exactly, but from one moment to another, the ground started to shake. Earthquakes are not that uncommon where I live, but this one was different. This one was huge. We were instructed to all get underneath our desks. We all had individual desks at the time, and so we did. I could hear girls crying near me, even guys. Everyone was frightened. The ground was shaking. The ceiling, I was so scared it was going to collapse on me, and thankfully it did not. By the time the earthquake was over, we left. But when we looked out, we saw that we were fortunate. The amount of carnage that had been inflicted on our city was huge. Buildings that I had gone past on my bus ride were no longer standing. Streets were covered in debris and rubble, and there were cries and the sounds of emergency sirens everywhere. As you can imagine, with any situation like this, the first thing you think about is your family. I wondered about my brother. The last time I saw him was watching TV. Or my mum, her baby. My dad. How were they, and the rest of my family? I desperately wanted to leave, to run home and make sure my mum was okay. My dad worked across town. I didn't know if he was safe either. My brother went to this exact school, but I'm sure he'd be fine, right? Doubt is what really frightened me. Not knowing if that morning had been the last time I'd see my parents, if my ungrateful ass and not saying thank you to my mum would be the last gesture that she'd remember me if she had perished. It was about 5 hours or so before the school let us leave. Thankfully, during that time I found my brother, who was a few years younger, safe and sound, and I think I cried more than I ever had in my life when I found out he was alright. But the fear still consumed my heart, and I needed to find my family. Things didn't go well from this point on. My dad suffered serious injuries, and unfortunately lost his life to them a few days later in the absolutely oversaturated hospitals. When I was finally allowed to go home, or at least a semblance of a home, I realized that our house was no longer standing. It was an apartment building, and it had pretty much collapsed. Eventually, they found my mother. She didn't make it. These things still haunt me, and was one of the reasons I moved from that country a long time ago. I still don't know if I'll ever go back. I'm deadly scared of earthquakes. At the time of these events, my brother, my father, and I, a 16-year-old male, are road tripping through Nevada and California as my graduation gift. It was the end of August, and after a long trip coming from Las Vegas, cruising through Los Angeles and heading north across California, we decided to stay in beautiful Santa Barbara for a few days. My father finds a motel not too far from the beach, and we were all in wonder as to the movie-like beauty of the city we're staying in. In the evening of our first night there, being back to the motel shortly after feasting on greasy and savory pizza from Rusty's Pizza Parlor, and walking along one of the most beautiful beaches in the USA, I start to get bored in the room. After having watched the television with my father and brother for about an hour, to change the scenery a bit, I decide to peek through our room window. As I kneel on the raspy purple carpet floor and draw the thick and heavy curtains out, a sense of dread takes hold of my whole being. I'm startled by the thing I see right across the street, about 100 feet from my window. What I'm looking at is at odds with the beautiful, picture-like frame created by the motel lobby entrance arch, delimiting it from my field of view. A beautiful shadow and light setting created by the streetlight beam on the pavement of the other side of the road reveals this man, whose physical traits are hooded by the shadows cast down towards by the light. Right under the streetlight, he is standing half in the light, half in the dark of night, as if the knowing of the effect the light has on him. He looks like he's in his late 20s, early 30s, and stares right at me. His gaze like a laser beam, and I can feel it all the way down to my kidneys. I can't see his crazy eyes from the distance, but I can feel them, and my subconscious picks up on the intent, which isn't good. He seems to have waited for me to look at him for a long time, as if he knew it would happen. He seems to have known, just as you know when you'll hear thunder after seeing lightning. A few seconds after he's made aware of my awareness of his presence, still staring at me, he starts, in a slow clockwork motion, sliding his index finger sideways across his throat, underneath his jaw from right to left, over and over, as if he's silently telling me, "I'll kill you." That's right. As the floor beneath me starts to sink, and a little taste of metal overwhelms the top of my tongue, I close the curtains as quick as if my life depended on it. Then, I turn my upper body away from the window towards my father, and tell him what I've seen. He just kind of shrugs it off, talking over the baseball game on TV, and tells me to let it go. But I can feel, along with this calm vibe of arrogant carefreeness coming from him, a hint of uneasiness that I can taste in the back of my mouth. 30 seconds go by, and I stupidly kneel uncomfortably again on the motel carpet below the windowsill. After loudly swallowing for luck, against my best judgment, I draw the curtains out a second time, but this time, my hand stops at the width of my head, allowing to view just enough of the outside world to be able to grasp what was happening outside of my seemingly safe motel room. There he is again. This time though, the man is standing 2/3 of the way to where he stood the first time I saw him. His facial traits are now darkened by the lack of streetlight, but I can still feel his crazy glare. He is under the hotel lobby parking lot arch. There's not much light there where he stands, but I can still perceive him doing his throat-slicing gesture, and is still communicating it to me through the pantomime. There is this desperate feeling of unfair doom in realizing that your poor vulnerable self is the target of something malicious, that doesn't know you as being with needs and fears, but knows and wants something from you which you are oblivious to. I'm starting to feel queasy and frightened. I close the curtain quickly once again and tell my dad of the man's presence, and he's approaching the room. I get on the bed trying to concentrate on the TV to forget what I'd just witnessed. I don't remember if my dad looked through the window to confirm what was happening, but I remember him telling me to stop looking outside if that's what was scaring me, and that we were safe in the room, which is locked. After what seemed like a few minutes passing, I peek again for the final time. This time the man is right in the parking lot, about 50 feet from our motel room, doing his gesture again. I start thinking that this man is probably mentally ill or something, and that I better stop looking at the window again. A clever thing to do, I tell myself. The man's behavior, although redundant and pathetic, nevertheless strikes me as being ominous and frightening. The night goes on with that feeling that even if I'm probably safe inside our room, there is this disturbed man missing a few cogs who's got nothing to lose outside the room, that behaves as if he wants nothing good for me. Would he be grinning or not? Would he raise his arms to gently tap the window while kneeling under the windowsill? I try not to think about it, and I sleep very uneasily that night. The following morning, not wanting to go outside of the room, I decide to stay in with my brother while my dad goes into the motel lobby to fetch orange juice breakfast and to speak to the motel clerk about the man outside. My father comes back after a few minutes with our breakfast and tells me that the clerk told him the guy who frightened me the night before is known in the area for his mental illness. He's probably a schizophrenic. And my dad then reassured me that the clerk told him he's not dangerous, and that we're safe staying there for a few more nights. Luckily, I never see the man again for the duration of our stay. Fast forward a few years. My father and I are reminiscing about our trip to California, and specifically about those days in Santa Barbara, when the mentally ill man threatened me with his finger outside our motel room is mentioned in the conversation. My father, as if relieved from not having to keep this secret anymore, lets out that the morning after that dreadful night, the motel clerk had in fact told him to be careful with the man. He had told him that in fact he was dangerous. My dad just didn't want to scare us by telling us the truth. I thanked him for lying to me that morning, and we agreed that we were lucky that we didn't see that man again. So me and this group of women, all of us friendly acquaintances that did group hikes, were hiking single file on a very thin trail through the mountains. My one problem with this group was that they insisted on talking loudly throughout the hike. I like to try and spot wildlife, so I ended up being in the front of the line in the hopes that I would see some critters before all the loud chatter drove them off. So I'm walking in the front, chilling, admiring all the thick forest and trees, and I take a step and put my foot down. As I do that, I hear a rustle, so I look down and I lift up my other foot to take another step. Less than an inch from my toes was this huge snake. I never saw how long it was, but it was around 3 inches in diameter and it started moving. Now this area had about 3 different types of rattlesnakes, along with copperheads, cottonmouths, and very rarely coral snakes. So I've been taught a healthy respect for snakes, as well as how to tell the difference between most of the species. I didn't even get a good look at the color before my hindbrain kicks in. This huge jolt runs through my body, like I stuck a fork in a socket. And before I even fully comprehend, oh hey, there's a snake, I'm 3 feet in the air and trying to travel backwards. I like to imagine it as one of those graceful anime leaps where they jump 20 back before a fight. But in reality it was more like a terrified cat springing into the air shouting, "Jesus Christ!" I crash into the woman behind me who yelps and turns to face me, but as she does she spots the snake and starts yelling at the top of her lungs. I was the one who nearly stepped on it, and this lady was more scared than I was. Well, the snake is no fool and decides, screw this, I was just chilling and sunning myself and these ladies come along and start screaming. I'm out of here. Thanks for ruining my morning. It slithers off into the undergrowth, and when it does, I see that its scales are pitch black. It is literally just a rat snake, both harmless and friendly. My grandma has 6-foot rat snakes living in her backyard, and she feeds them leftover chickens sometimes. Totally harmless. I felt like one hell of a fool, but that snake scared the bejesus out of me. and one of the other women took up the head of the lion for quite some time afterwards. My dad passed away in a motorcycle accident about 10 years ago, and after he passed, weird stuff started happening at the dorm when I got back. The clock would fall off the wall and change time, batteries would separate themselves from remotes, and bangs and knocks were regular. But the weirdest thing that would happen was when I was coming home from college and took a shower, got dressed, and headed back into the bathroom to finish getting ready. And the mirror was just clearing the steam off, and lo and behold, I see smear marks faintly that looked like letters. So I tip the mirror because it's one of those triple pane medicine cabinet mirrors, and I see "Hey" spelled out in his handwriting with the elven eye symbol from Lord of the Rings that my dad would put everywhere. This was probably 6 months plus after he passed, and I have no idea where it came from since it was only me and my mum in the house, and I knew she wouldn't do that. The crazy part is, like a week before that, I had broke open a glow stick and splashed it on the mirror, but the writing was under the splashes, and none was smeared or touched. Still to this day I can't explain how that happened. We actually took the entire mirror off the wall so it wasn't ruined. 2 years ago, my husband and I flew to LA for a weekend getaway. We stayed at a boutique hotel off Sunset. It's more of a hipster type place, not normally somewhere I'd stay, but it was nice, clean, and had good vibes. We met up with our friends who live in LA and went out for dinner and drinks. It was a late night and we came back to the hotel. I was exhausted and jet-lagged. It was 1:30 AM or something like that. My husband is a very deep sleeper. I'm an extremely light sleeper, except when I've had a bunch of drinks, which I had definitely consumed that night. So it was lights out for both of us very quickly. Around 3 AM, I suddenly wake up and open my eyes. There's a light on in our room. The room had been totally dark when we went to bed. The light came from the doorway, which illuminated the silhouette of a man standing at the foot of the bed, just standing there staring. For a moment I'm speechless, confused, and also slightly intoxicated and haven't moved. My reaction is delayed, and then the stark fear and reality kick in. I grasp and say, "What the hell?" The man was wearing a red plaid shirt and had dark hair and a beard. I couldn't make out his features as my eyes were adjusting to waking up, and the lighting that illuminated him shadowed half his face. The man says, "I need to speak to Drake." I know this may sound somewhat comical, but I assure you at the time it was terrifying. So I scream, "Get the hell out of here!" which jolts my husband awake, who immediately sits up and sees this man at the foot of our bed. My husband is 6'5", which may not be evident given half his body is underneath the bedding, but either way the man responds, "Sorry, wrong room," and bolts out, slamming the door shut behind him. My husband jumps up and runs for the door, but I stop him from going outside into the hallway. Who knows if the man is waiting there trying to lure him out, or whether other people are there ready to pounce. I keep looking through the peephole but don't see anything. At this point we are both shocked and in disbelief and probably still drunk. We call down to the front desk but no one answers. We call repeatedly and still no one replies. We contemplate what to do, and around 20 minutes later we decide to get dressed and go down to the front desk. There is an employee at the front desk and there's also a bar in the lobby. My husband walks around to see if he can spot the guy who was in our room. As he's searching, I go up and start telling the guy behind the front desk what happened. But as I begin this story, I burst into tears, and it's only then that I realize how shaken up I am about it all. The employee gets the manager and he asks me what time the man came into the room, but I don't know how long he was standing there until I woke up and saw him. I think he must have been there a while for me to just wake up. My husband comes back empty-handed. We go back up to the room. The next day the manager calls and says there wasn't anything on the security cameras, but I didn't believe him. He offers us a free night as compensation. Even though he claims he didn't see anything, we take the free night because what else can you do? We just want to go about the rest of our mini vacation. Why was the man in our room? How did he have a working keycard? But the thought I have most trouble with, what would have happened if I hadn't have woken up? Our door was locked, but clearly someone had a duplicate keycard. Here's what I've learned. If you don't already, always put the deadlock on your hotel room door. In something we never thought to do, and now I always check it twice. I used to climb at Joshua Tree a lot, a decade ago, so we would camp there frequently. One Halloween we were hanging out by the fire, and a group of 3 guys walk up and ask if we wanted to head to the Chasm of Doom. Without hesitation I replied, yeah, sure. My friends were less enthusiastic, but I was able to convince them to come along. This place had a certain amount of legend surrounding it in J-tree climbing circles, so it was somewhat known to us, but we still had yet to get there. This was pre-Instagram, so there wasn't much info on it at the time, other than how to get there and its Talus Cave. As we walked over, the guys were filling us in on the tradition of the chasm. Always take first timers at night, no headlamps or lights allowed. The leaders shout beta. Instructions were to go on, what to avoid, and how not to die. If you have to follow it, you want to make it through. If you cheat and use a light while in there, you risk upsetting the spirits or something, and we laughed that off. As we reached the end of our walk to the entrance of the cave, one of our guides asked if any of us had claustrophobia issues. I laughed and asked why, to which they described the birth canal, a horizontal crack that you have to wiggle through at some point in the cave that was very cramped. After hearing this, one of my friends noped out of there, and being that the other friend and he were dating at the time, they both decided to leave and return to camp. That left me standing at the base of a hill ready to scramble up the mouth of a cave with 3 strangers I'd met 15 minutes ago to be led through, blind. Sounds perfectly safe and rational. We scramble up over boulders, under boulders, past yucca sprouting from cracks, rats scurried around, and the mood was starting to rise above the mountains across the valley as we reached the mouth of the chasm. It was a vertical crack no more than a few feet wide. We file in one by one, with the leader instructing us where to step, where to place our hands for balance, and warning us about protrusions from the ceiling so we don't hit our heads. The pace was slow, and it was not terribly interesting for the first few minutes, as I was more interested in how my brain was shifting the way it perceives physical space through touch rather than sight. In the complete darkness, I was constructing a 3-dimensional map of the cave in my head. It felt like I was looking at the physical space, even in the pitch black. For a while, I remained more fascinated by this than the actual activity, up until the point where the ground had been relatively flat with some small obstacles to avoid so you didn't trip and fall on your face. The leader had just instructed us that there was a large boulder you had to crouch under, and then immediately after there would be something that you had to climb over. He did not state any details about these objects, so figuring out your way around them was all up to you and your appendages to identify the parameters of the space that you were in and how to navigate it. Again, this all felt fascinating until I tried to climb over it. I was last in line and everyone was still here, so I knew that moving forwards was not going to result in my death or anything, but my confidence was completely sucked out of me by a very simple comment by the leader. When you climb over, make sure you stay to the right. If you go too far to the left, you'll fall. At this point, the wonder of the process of navigating through the cave gave way to a growing sense of anxiety over real risk or injury. My relaxed state was now being corrupted by scenarios of falling down a hole in complete darkness. To make matters worse, when I gingerly tried to reach down to the other side of my toes to find solid footing, all I found was air. I wondered how far down was ground beneath me. Was I in the wrong position? Am I dangling over a potential fall? I had long gotten over my fear of heights thanks to climbing, but this created a unique form of vertigo. All the physiological responses were there: tense muscles, anxiety, disorientation, and I felt stuck. Part of me wanted to go back, but being that everyone had already passed it, the thought of navigating my way back out solo seemed not only risky for my physical well-being, but my pride too. I was tense with anxiety, but convinced myself to just commit to whatever drop there was. I let it go and started to fall, a total of 2 inches. Along the way there were more situations like this, including some sections that required climbing blind, making a wrong turn and backtracking. Even though I had come to realize that my anxiety was also flying blind, I tried to rationalize it away. It still persisted. It didn't help that the leader was dramatizing every danger to make us think we got lost. We all talked crap to lighten the mood when it got too much. Finally, we got to the birth canal. They worked their way through it, and I listened to each of their complaints as they struggled with it, hoping to have an easier go. I wasn't terribly claustrophobic being stuck in a tight place in the dark, but it wasn't something I wanted to experience. I turned around, lied on my back, and started through head first. If you can imagine a penguin trying to move between 2 mattresses on his back, you can imagine the position I was in. Movement was slow and restrained. My back slid on a slab and my chest was pressed against the roof. I got stuck. I had to back out a bit, move in a slightly different trajectory, and find a spot that had more clearance. Finally, I made it through and had to climb up about 10 feet until I rejoined the group on the top of some boulder. We were now boulder hopping back over the chasm we had just navigated through. Essentially, it's just a crack in the rocks and large boulders would fall in and get stuck, essentially creating a roof. To continue, we had to head back the way we came, following the chasm back. It felt like we were in a Donkey Kong level in a sense. The boulders didn't completely cover the chasm and the drops were about 15 to 30 feet according to the leader. I wasn't sure if it was an exaggeration at first, but by the time we reached the end of that section, the moonlight was shining through, and I could see that any fall would be very serious. Finally made it to the top and climbed some sketchy slab to get a great view of the valley being lit by the moon. We yelled down to other people heading into the mouth of the cave, and sat there for a while taking in the afterglow of the adrenaline, drank a beer, and laughed off the melodrama of the whole endeavor. It was honestly one of the most fun things I'd ever done, but it certainly scared the crap out of me. We then had to find our way down, which ended up requiring some awkward down climbs as we ended up going the wrong way. At least we had the moon for that part. I was still living at my dad's house when I was 17. It started the day we visited the house. I just got chills thinking about it. We were doing a house tour with the property seller from a company where my dad told me, "This is going to be your room." As soon as I entered, I knew I would never sleep there. I had that weird feeling like, no way am I going to sleep there. Finally, my dad bought the house. The first night I slept in that particular room, and I actually hadn't been able to sleep. I wasn't believing in ghosts, not sure if I still do, but there was something about this room I just wasn't able to explain, like a very strong bad feeling. I'm not someone who's ever been scared by this kind of stuff. The day after, I told my dad I would never sleep in that room again, and he saw I was dead serious. He knew I wasn't the kind of guy to care about this stuff, but actually, I did at the time. So he decided to build me a new room in this huge basement, like new walls and stuff. The room didn't even exist before we built it. A week or 2 went by, and then I started to hear voices in my imagination. It was just so strange. Then I started to hear an unmistakable knocking, softly on the walls for no reason, and doors that I knew were closed would open when I went to the bathroom at night. I told my dad and he started to make fun of me by opening doors and knocking on the basement door, saying it wasn't him. My best friend came over, and he felt something strange too, and didn't want to come back to sleep even after when he was drunk. He was telling me things like, "No way am I sleeping in that basement again." After a month or so, I started getting sleep paralysis on a weekly basis. Scared the hell out of me. Never saw anything more than my empty room though. Actually, I never saw anything. Always strange feelings and doors that had been opened, and creepy voices in my head. I was a serious hockey player with no drugs or mental problems. And one day I was at my girlfriend's house and was talking to her about it. Her mum heard some of what I was saying and came immediately. She was some kind of medium and stuff. She listened to me and told me she would come and see what was going on. It's after that discussion I started really getting scared because I was more convinced there was a physical reasoning behind it all. She came and I'll always remember the look she gave me. She immediately got out and told me there's one guy who's not happy and he carries a very heavy weight on his foot, and there's another guy who only wants to make jokes. I'll take care of that. She also told me some of the things that were happening in the house without me having told it to anyone. And from that moment on, nothing ever happened again. I asked her what she did, and she explained that she went to my bedroom, made them come to her, and then took them away from the house. I know it's weird, but the fact that nothing ever happened again creeps me out too. I'd like to add to the fact that I did some research afterwards. There was only one owner before my dad, and he confirmed that he built the house and nothing tragic ever happened there. I would also like to add that I'm French. So, you know, like from the moment she left the house and did her thing, nothing ever happened again. No sleep paralysis, no voice, no doors, no shaking, no knocking, no nothing. It still creeps me out just thinking about it. This happened during our long weekend getaway, a while ago. My friends and I decided we deserved a bit of a break from our usual surroundings and targeted somewhere 3 hours away for a 4-day weekend. We tried booking for a beach house either south or central coast, but due to demand with the pandemic and everyone wanting a local getaway, as well as school holidays, we couldn't find a suitable location which would fit 14 people. Luckily, I found a place a 5-hour drive away from our area. Not the usual place we'd normally go. This was a good 1 hectare area, unusually shaped home in the middle of it all with a saltwater pool right in front of the house, with the next house a good 500 meters away or more. We normally go for beachside accommodation, but due to the aforementioned reason we had to settle for this one. You can tell when the property ended as it was fenced, but there was a gate that is chest high with a padlock, which we didn't have the key to, which had a latch, so pretty much anyone can just open and close as they please, and this detail is important for the story. We didn't really worry about it that much, as we were away from everyone else, which means that we can do karaoke and watch scary movies without worrying about noise. It was an amazing break in accommodation, but for one particular event. In total, we took 5 cars. We parked our cars close to where the fenced pool is, as we came in staggered stages. Check-in was at 3 PM on Friday, and 9 of our friends were already there by the time we started to drive. They shared photos and videos of the place and were already enjoying themselves. The views and facilities, myself, my fiancé's sister, and 2 other friends left close to 7 PM, and got to the area past midnight. It was a creepy drive for the final 2 kilometers as it was extremely dark, and you have to drive past tall trees with no lampposts and cross the train tracks to get entry out of the place. Our friends greeted us at the gate, as they were worried about the darkness. We parked our cars, caught up with them before heading to bed at around 2. Saturday came and we had brekkie, went up for a drive up north to check out the sights, and went back before dark as we needed to use the outside grill for our dinner. I didn't really want anyone to hang out outside in the dark as there's no visibility, and can't ever be too safe. We had drinking games inside, the girls did karaoke, while taking soju shots until 3 AM. The next day, the topic was the fun that we'd had the night before, and one of the girls threw up from all the uncontrolled drinking. We had late breakfast and planned to have sausage sizzle, which is grilled sausages squeezed in a piece of white bread with caramelized onion and your choice of barbecue or tomato sauce. For lunch, again, when that required the outside grill. I wasn't fast as it was 2 PM and most of us were just hanging in the pool area, which was adjacent from the dining area next to the grill. As we were eating, my view is towards the cars, and where we would be coming from if we decided to go to the pool area from the main house, when I see this woman wearing a pink bucket hat, and I was wondering who it could be from our group, and quickly realized she wasn't part of our group. I thought she was one of the distant neighbors and we were too loud the night before and that the noise traveled and she was there to complain. Others thought that she'd booked the place and maybe there was a problem with the booking. But she approached and said, I apologize, I know you guys are here to have fun and have a bit of a break, but I used to own this place until it was turned into an Airbnb by the current owner. By this time she was standing in front of us in the center and she took off her hat and we saw that she's most likely been through chemotherapy. I sold this house in 2018 and it was a very hard decision. I was wondering if I could take a look inside the house and maybe quickly show my friends what it looks like on the inside, as it's an architecturally designed home and very unique. My fiance's brother quickly said, no, while some of the girls were looking at each other considering her request, as she seemed genuinely emotional and looked like she'd been through something. I followed up with, we're checking out tomorrow morning. I can contact the current owner and let her know that you want to check the place out after we leave. She quickly responded, no, it's alright. Are you guys from Sydney? We responded that we were, and she said that she now lives round there too, and is staying nearby for the next week, and was trying her luck in having a look at the house. It seemed she was establishing that she was the previous owner, and she mentioned that the new owners added an additional tank, and asked if the garden towards the back of the property has been removed because it was a problem before, and asked if the red chandeliers still existed. We knew the chandelier is white, not red, and if we had access to all rooms including the ones next to the grill, as we only had access to one of the 2 rooms as the other was padlocked, we said yes. I quickly had a look towards the gate and saw that there was a 4WD right outside blocking it. One of my friends had the wit to ask her name and if she knew the current owners, or maybe she could ask them for permission instead. She responded with, my name's Karen, and we exchanged paperwork online so I didn't really know them personally. She then asks if she can just have a look outside, and we let her. About 30 seconds later she comes back and asks what the current owners have done with the part of the area. We mentioned we didn't know and it's probably owned by the neighbor. She then responded with, oh, the owner's father owns that property. She thanked us and walked towards the gate, all the while checking out the house. I then messaged the owner letting her know that there was a woman there called Karen who wanted to check the house out. The owner replied saying, that's odd, there's no previous owner named Karen. I'll let the caretaker who lives down the road know about this. We created all these scenarios in our head. What if the padlocked room was where she wanted to check out? We didn't see her friends, so we didn't know who we had to deal with. We are glad we didn't let her in as we didn't know what anyone's capable of. Also, we pointed out her bravery in approaching a group of strangers to check out the house when she could have easily contacted the owner to ask her instead if she had a week in the area. We then checked out the property history and found that the house was built in 07, sold in 13 and again in 2018. The property photos had the red chandelier prior to it being sold in 2013, which means it wasn't hers to begin with. Her spiel made it sound like she had the house built and she lived on the property for a good 10 years. We were pretty much on edge that night. Every little noise we would jump at assuming it was her and her friends coming back to take a closer look. Who knows what her plans really were? My boyfriend and I were doing a road trip around Scotland last year. We were sleeping in the car during the nights and would get up, pack everything, and head somewhere else the next day. One night we stayed in this gorgeous bay right by the sea. Beautiful sunset, lots of other campers, it was ideal. We liked it so much we wanted to hang around the area a bit longer, so the next night we stayed in the same bay. However, when I got back to the bay to set up camp for the night, there was no one else there. Bit weird, but whatever, no big deal. It was late when we arrived and it was already starting to get a bit dark. My boyfriend started cooking dinner. As he was doing so, I decided to take some rubbish over to the bins about 100 feet away. I got to the bins and suddenly heard this weird hissing sound at the top of the cliffs next to us. It just kept going on and on up there, then it stopped, so I thought it might be owls. They do weird stuff like that, right? Then I heard it again, only this time it was coming down the cliff to my level, and it was approaching me. I shone the torch around, but couldn't see anything, so I legged it back to the car and told my boyfriend. He sort of shrugged and carried on cooking, then suddenly stopped. He looked off to where I heard the noise for a moment, then started packing the car. I asked him what was going on, but he just said to keep packing. We got in the car, packed up, and we were preparing to leave when headlights came from down the lane. A police van drove past towards the end of the bay and looped back and left again. No idea what that was about. Either way, we left the bay and found somewhere more populated to stay. When I asked my boyfriend why he'd wanted to leave so quickly, he said he heard the exact same thing I had heard, the hissing from up the cliffs, descending to our level and approaching, getting louder. Noped right out of that place the very next morning. The house I lived in was haunted. Best I give you some history. I was a kid when I first moved in, and lived there for over 15 years. I moved out for reasons unrelated to anything. My mum bought this house from the original owners who had built it. The original owners had one daughter who worked for a famous politician. She met an unfortunate end that people find shady. The parents moved somewhere else after losing their only child, and eventually had the house I lived in built. Not sure how long they lived there, but we bought it and they moved into a nursing home. Soon after I moved in, I would hear what sounded like a little girl saying, "Hey," exactly like someone just trying to get someone's attention. I would be in my bedroom, and it sounded like it was coming from the front door. I go to the front door and no one was ever there. This was also in the middle of the day. The only children I remember wouldn't have been babies, or not even been born yet when this happened. It happened repeatedly a few times a day, on and off. My family is Buddhist, and we got a family friend to set up some shrines to protect us. The haze stopped, and all was well for a while. We never stopped having those shrines, and they're still there despite more things eventually happening. My house is oddly long. Family room / basement door is on one side of the house, followed by the kitchen, living room, and then bedroom areas. Only my mum and I lived there for quite a time. One day I was home alone and heard the distinct sound of someone going up the stairs. The door to come up, opening and closing, and footsteps walking towards the bedroom. I was in my bedroom, which is the first one after that stretch of the house. I wasn't spooked, as I really did think it was my mum coming home in the afternoon, but no one was there at all. Years went by, and my then boyfriend, now fiance, moved in for a bit. As a heads up, he's had paranormal stuff happen to him previously. He got the middle guest room. The following will be his experiences. One of my ugly dolls was in his room, on his bed. He wasn't a fan of it and put it on the floor one day. When he woke up next morning, it was back on the bed next to him. Neither my mum or I moved that doll. That long stretch from the bedroom to the other side of the house, he never liked it. Felt like he was being watched and not by anything good. I'd also like to add that I was always rushed through that hallway at night, with lights on if I had to. So we were never fans of that walk. It got better when we adopted 3 cats, who mainly stayed in the family room on the other side, like they formed a bridge between the 2 areas. One day he came home from work one morning, 3rd shift, and noticed the lights behind my mum's bedroom would turn on by themselves. They didn't have any motion or timer. My mum was at work. I have also seen a door that was open later be closed without anyone around, but I didn't witness the act itself. Another thing I heard a few times was the sound of a bouncing ball outside my house. This was years ago, so I can't recall what kind of ball it sounded like, but imagine a kid just bouncing a ball on concrete repeatedly nearby. But it was only in the middle of the night, and there is no hard surface near that corner of the house, just grass and dirt. The driveway is on the whole other side of the house. So the house now has 3 people. One day, due to work and travel, I was home alone. I was in my room and heard a very distinct knock on my closed door. From the rhythm to the volume, it sounded exactly like how my mom would playfully knock on my door to get my attention. 3 lightish knocks in quick succession. I remember being very, very scared about this because whatever it was imitating my mum. I did a lot of praying for protection that night. Finally, we arrive at the last incident. If you notice, everything I had experienced had either been something that changed but I didn't witness or something audible. This was my first visual experience. This happened with my mum and dad in the house at night. My fiancé had moved out by then. My dad was in the kitchen cooking for the next day. My mom was in the guest room and I was in my own room laying on the floor on my stomach on my laptop. My actual computer desk is so full of crap, I chose the floor. I was turned away from the entrance with the door to the right of my feet from my point of view. The door was closed, the lights were on, and in the reflection of my laptop monitor I saw someone pass from left to right, with the lights behind me, and seeing from the display that's on, I can't say I saw any details, but the lights were interrupted by a figure walking past, like someone was going from the door to my room and passing the lights. The way the reflection looked seemed something out of the ordinary, and I thought it was my mum messing with me. I quickly turned around, but naturally no one was there in the room with me. The door was still shut, and no one could have opened the door, walked back and forth and left that quickly and quietly. I immediately checked on my mum in the room right next to me. I had to eliminate any doubt, even with the unnatural speed a human wouldn't had time to sneak out. She was on the bed with blankets, a lap desk, a laptop, and busy as a bee. No way my dad could have done anything like that. He's old and not quiet. So that was my second fearful incident. I'm not gonna lie, I did not feel comfortable sleeping in my room for quite a while after that. Just the culmination of all of this was getting freaky for me. We went to a Buddhist temple to get some stuff done. I was planning on moving out soon, and didn't want whatever this was following me. So far, so good. Despite my mum having her fair share of ghostly experiences in her home country, when she was a youngster, she never experienced anything in this house. My dad as well. We actually didn't want to tell him any of this as we didn't want to spook him. In summary, I feel like maybe the beginning may have had something to do with the daughter of the original homeowners, although she never lived here and definitely wasn't a little girl when she passed. It's like she was looking for where her parents lived last. I don't know. Maybe she regressed to a more innocent time of her life with her child's voice. As for the rest, I have no idea. I'm just happy that I'm not feeling that fear anymore. A couple of friends and I drove into a horror movie once, by accident. It was either late November or early December about 5 or 6 years ago. I was deeply religious at the time and we were heading to one of those living nativity things where they have pretend actors to be the Virgin Mary, Joseph, the wise men, etc. And they kind of put on an outdoor show. It was held at a Christian campground outside of a nearby city, and we didn't know the area very well. We had someone give us directions. This was winter in the US, so it was already getting dark when we set out. We got to the area just fine, but we forgot the name of the exit we were supposed to take to reach the grounds. Luckily, the campgrounds had a big sign right next to an exit, so we assumed this was the way to go. We took the road and thought nothing of it. Crisis averted. The city this campground is next to is actually pretty large, and the exit we took is very close to a shopping district, so it wasn't like we started in the middle of nowhere. But very abruptly the exit turned from civilization to deep woods. We thought, well, it's a campground, so that's about right, and carried on driving. Pretty soon we passed a clearing on the right. The clearing was maybe 50 feet, and then woods again. And at the very edge of the woods, it wasn't full night yet so you couldn't see, was this huge stone gate with wrought iron doors. It looked like a cemetery gate, but it didn't lead to a path or anything, just trees. had no fence around it either, just gate. So we kept going, remarking to each other that it was kind of creepy, but still we didn't think much of it. It was starting to get foggy at this point. I felt like maybe I should point out that despite it being winter, it wasn't that cold, and there wasn't any snow. A little while later, we came to some houses, and this is where things got weird. The first house was just standard white suburban house, but in the driveway, which was very short, was a van with all the doors open. The hazard lights were on too. The car was on, but nobody was in or around it, and the house was completely dark. We were a little nervous now, wondering if maybe something bad had happened, like an accident or something, and the driver of our car slowed down to look. Then my other friend in the front pointed ahead, and it turns out all of the houses on the street were like this on both sides of the road. Lights out, cars in the driveway, all of the doors on the cars open with the hazards on. At this point we were more than a little freaked out, thinking we'd driven straight into Silent Hill or a particularly mean prank if nothing else. Though it seems a little strange for it to just be a community-wide prank in the middle of winter, nowhere close to Halloween. We still haven't seen any people, mind you. For whatever reason, we still continued to drive, maybe to get out of there faster. There was a little bend in the road, and the instant we started through it, this massive black dog, sort of German Shepherd looking thing, came out of nowhere and ran full tilt to the driver's side of the car. I'm still not sure if the dog actually made contact with the car, but if not, it did get incredibly close. After charging at us, it didn't retreat either. It stayed in the road, barking its heads off. Our driver did a quick U-turn and we got out of there as fast as possible, ditching the nativity thing, and never tried to go back. We found out when we got home and talking to the person who gave us directions that it wasn't even the right exit we were on, and now several years later, we're not exactly sure which exit we took that night. All I know is I'm glad we chose to get out of there when we did. I didn't want any part of whatever was going on that night. Hard pass, no thanks. This happened about 12 years ago when I was 15-16. Me and my parents took a trip from Pennsylvania to New York City to visit a foreign exchange student called Francis. We previously hosted him. He was back in America working in a restaurant, and we wanted to spend the weekend with him and taking out to some nice places. We got a nice upgrade at our hotel and had a luxury suite that had a bedroom where my parents would sleep and a big living room where me and Francis would sleep. The rooms connected, but both also had their own entrances to the hallway that faced each other in a little nook. Francis had to work till midnight the night we got there, so my parents went to bed and I stayed up to wait for him. Shortly after midnight, I hear a knock at the door to my parents' room. I assumed Francis arrived, so I went to open the door for him before he woke up my parents. Didn't even check the peephole first. I opened the door to a large, mid-30-year-old man holding a gas can. He seemed startled that I opened the other door behind him and went, Hi, I was wondering if you could spare some money for gas. I replied, Oh, let me ask my parents. I close the door, go to the other room to wake up my mum, but she yells, Sorry, we can't help you. She definitely has better sense than me because my dumbass doesn't realize it's the middle of the night and we're on the 10th floor of a hotel. He didn't say anything in response. I checked the peephole and he was already gone. Francis showed up a half hour later and we had a great time for the rest of the weekend. But I still wonder what this guy's real intentions were, and what would have happened if one of my parents opened the door instead of me. When I was 12, my family, including my mum, my dad, my sister who was 16, and our dog, Dawn, moved into a mobile home in a mobile home park. I was a horrible child. I had no respect for my parents or their rules and ran away on several occasions. My parents were at the end of their tether, so they signed me up for 4-H and brought me my first pair of chickens. As I got further involved with the showing and showmanship, I acquired a good flock of chickens and needed a place to house them. My 4-H leader lived at a dairy farm across the street of the mobile home park and offered a good chunk of land to build an aviary. My 4-H leader, Mrs. Johnson, had a daughter my age, and we became fast friends. I went to the dairy every day and was shown all the daily happenings of dairy life. My favorite place was the sick pen, as I was going to be a veterinarian. I helped the vet, and was even taught how to pull a calf if their mother was having trouble. I stuck my arm up there, but my arm wasn't long enough, and the vet let me help pull, and I got to tend to the calf once it was on the ground. Now to the meat of this story. My friend who lived in the dairy would love taking off our shoes and socks and walking through the cow pens, where there was thick manure, and it was slowly moving across the deep parts. We would get manure up to our legs and all over our clothes. The smell was horrible. One day we were walking through the pens, and I always knew the pens that held the bulls, and I knew better than to go into them, because bulls can get pretty aggressive when they're protecting their ladies. Sandy and I are nearing the middle of the pen when I look back, and she's sitting on the pipe coral just looking at me. I was confused until I saw the herd of cows part, and out steps the bull. We're staring at each other, and I notice which bull he is. It's Hurricane, the meanest bull at the dairy. I take a step back, but I'm in the deepest part of the manure and my feet are sticking. I take a step, and he takes a step, and he starts to snort loudly, telling me he's coming for me. I turn and try to run, but my feet are not working, and with every step I take, Hurricane takes two. I'm heading for the pipe coral, and just as I'm throwing myself head first into a diving motion through the pipes, I feel his head touch my feet as I fall to the ground in a sticker bush. Sandy and I never walked through the pens again, and we slowly lost interest in our friendship. I guess our friendship was held together by manure. To this day, every time I drove by one of the dairies and smelled the wafting scent of manure on a foggy day, I remember all the fun I had at the dairy, and also the day that I was nearly killed by Hurricane. This is the first time I share anything like this, but I need to get it off my chest because it's been freaking me out for years, and I can't talk to any of my friends about it because they don't believe me. I have a long list of things that have happened to me over the years we've been in the house I currently live in, and I am a 20-year-old college student since the time of this post. The first event I can remember was when I was around 5 or 6. This is shortly after my brother passing away from cancer. I had a babysitter with me who knew me since just after I was able to walk. I don't remember her much after this event, but she was extremely nice. Anyway, I walked into the entrance area in my house that has stairs going to the upstairs. This area is connected to the dining room, living room and kitchen. I saw a man walking down the stairs with what seemed like a Civil War attire. When he got to the landing and turned to go down the rest of the stairs, he looked me dead in the eyes and moved his mouth like he was talking, but I couldn't hear him. In response, I turned to call my babysitter Emma, and I turned back and he was gone. I don't know what to think of that besides an overactive imagination, but I don't think so. Shortly after this event, Emma quit because she got scared. I don't remember saying this, but according to my parents, I said something along the lines of, "He doesn't like you," and her, before she almost got into a crash a few days later. The second and third events all happened in a 2-year time period. I usually have to bring the Christmas decorations back to the basement in mid-January. It was a normal day and we just boxed all the Christmas tree ornaments, so I had to go and put them in the corner of the basement, where we have random stuff from when my parents first got married to where they first moved into the house after it got built. We put the box down, and as I'm still walking back to the stairs, I heard a faint girl's voice whisper something behind me. My hairs stood on end, and I book it up the stairs and start crying. They don't listen to me since I'm only 10 at the time, and a year comes and goes, and I've steeled myself for this moment, again, thinking I just heard the TV that's directly above me. But again I hear a girl's voice saying something, but this time it was in my ear. The fourth event happens in a very similar way a few years later, since I refused to go to the basement alone. I go down there because I needed to grab something out of the fridge for my dad, and I already didn't want to be down there. Just as I'm leaving, I hear a girl laugh, coming from the corner of the basement, where the other two events happened, and one of the pipes starts making a similar noise to a teapot boiling. This was the first and only time this ever happened in the house. The fifth event was from when I was around 13 to 14. It was late at night, and I was sleeping, and I remember when something opened the door to my room and walked in. It didn't make a sound, except when the door opened, and it was a man in his 60s with a cane that had a strange design on the handle. He didn't seem threatening or anything, and he didn't show any emotion. I must have fallen asleep somewhere in that time, because I had my dad come in yelling that I was going to be late for school. After school, I talked to my mum to pick me up after football, and explained it to her, describing the man and his cane. She flipped out because that night her father passed away, and I had never met this man before in my life, so there's no way for me to know what he looks like or his cane that he had for years. She doesn't even have pictures of her father in the house or anywhere that I would be able to find. This last bit, other than the main events happening, I've heard doors and cupboards open and slam shut over the years, when I've been the only one in the house since my parents usually left for work at 8 AM and didn't get back until at least 9 or 10. I had the pleasure of going on the Chernobyl tour 6 years ago in May. Kiev was so incredibly beautiful. Seeing what happened is devastating, but the tour was creepy. More mosquitoes than I've ever seen in my life. Only buildings we had free range in was an old elementary school. We got a poke inside the theatre, but not past the main entrance, and we could walk the stands at their football stadium. People still live there and in part of the buffer zone. There are still shops in the green zone, which I believe is a 5-mile radius from the plant. I remember when we pulled up to the plant and got out, our tour guide said, "Just so you know, this sarcophagus is very unstable and could collapse at any minute." That was my first "I don't want to be here" thought. On a side note, Ukrainians are some of the most hospitable, nicest and friendliest people I've ever met. I truly did not want to leave, and wish those still fighting for freedom their best of luck. I don't believe in ghosts, but I did see something once that I can't explain, and have chalked it up to a trick of the brain. Let's see what you think. I used to work in a resort deep in the Algonquin Park. It was basically rustic living for the super rich. It was a half-hour drive to self-service and an hour drive to the nearest town. I finished my late shift at about midnight, and I was walking back to my cabin. I clearly saw an elderly man with suspenders and a plaid shirt walking by me on the path. We were not allowed to speak to the guests unless they spoke to us first, so I didn't say anything to him. It was pretty dark, and I had to turn around to make sure that he was heading the right way to the guest cabins. And he had straight up disappeared. There was nowhere for him to go, except into the thick woods, and if he had done that, well, I would have heard it. Very strange. The ocean always freaks me out. Imagine this. You're treading water on the surface of the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific, the deepest part of the world's ocean. There's a storm raging and the waters are violent. It's the middle of the night and everything is pitch black. The water is frigid cold, and wave upon wave relentlessly hit you under the surface. You glimpse a faint light from the moon slightly illuminating the turbulent waters as you struggle to stay afloat. Gasping for air, you glance around desperately, looking for anything that could help you. Your heart sinks as you realize there's nothing but ocean for thousands of miles. Then a giant wave slams you under the surface, plunging you deep into the water. As you sink into the dark abyss, the thought of 7 miles of water beneath you horrifies you, and you have no idea what terror lurks under the darkness. You struggle to push yourself back to the surface, but your arms and legs have given up. This is you, Anyone would be terrified of this. I know I was.